Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is a show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts. And our team today is Carly Jermyn, CEO and Solicitor at Woodstock Legal Services, who are residential landlord and tenant law specialists.
Hi Stephen.
That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't
It is,
it? But
isn't
we
it?
got it
You
all
did it.
out. Okay, well welcome to you, Carly. And Akhil Mair, Managing Director of Our Mortgage Broker Limited. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Stephen.
I think your second show on our channel, so welcome to you both. Akhil, you're first. If using a broker to provide a mortgage facility, what fees am I likely to have to pay, or does the lender pay any broker fees by way of commissions?
Right. So there are many fees associated with any type of mortgage. So if we go for a residential homeowner mortgage, the typical fees that a borrower must pay would be typically a valuation fee, sometimes a lender arrangement fee. You'll have a legal conveyancer fee and a stamp duty to pay for the purchase. If it is a buy-to-let purchase, the additional fee might be an additional stamp duty charge. In terms of the fees that we receive as a mortgage brokerage from the lender, yes, we do receive a procuration fee, and that is detailed in the key facts illustration that the client will receive from us in advance notice. So they're the outline fees that the client will need to pay and the fees that we receive.
So your lender is going to pay you a fee?
Indeed.
And that's specified in your quotation?
Indeed.
Okay. So does the borrower pay another fee to you?
Yes.
To you?
Yes. So depending on the type of inquiry and the clientele, we do usually charge a mortgage broker fee, and that's a service fee for our research that we do to part of the inquiry, and we detail that up front. But what we do as an independent finance brokerage is we do all the due diligence and research at no charge and no obligation to the borrower. And as the case progresses, we'll then charge them a small commitment fee along the way, but we'll outline that up front. And again, it's not set in stone what the exact fee is, but it's not going to load the bank.
So if I was borrowing through you, would I negotiate with you about that fee?
I always say you should always negotiate any fees.
Okay, that's good. I mean, I suppose it's very important for any borrower to understand exactly what they're in for and not have a shock some way down the line. I mean, so like you say, if you buy to let, you've got a premium to pay, haven't you, in terms of stamp duty?
Yes.
You've probably got a little bit more due diligence to pay for one way or another with the inquiries about your property and yourself.
Yes.
So yeah, it's very, very important to be specified. And that, what sort of agreement is that specified in? Do you have a sort of brokerage agreement that you put forward, or?
Yes. So initially, as a brokerage, we'll provide an indicative quote of what the rates and fees look like. Alongside that, we'll provide a formal documentation, also known as a key facts illustration or an ESIS. So that will outline all the fees that relate to the mortgage specifically, any fees that we're charging to the borrower, and we'll actually outline them on the call or in face-to-face of all the detail, all the fees. So there's no shocks in the system along the line.
Okay. And I think it would be remiss of me at this stage, if having a mortgage broker on the programme, I didn't ask you what you think about interest rates at the moment and where they're going.
Well, unfortunately, I wish we can rewind the clock, but we had that crazy budget at the end of last year, which brought about a lot of alarm bells. But we are where we are at the moment. But I think the key here is now to speak to an independent mortgage brokerage, understand all the pitfalls and where you're going with your property journey. And what I would say is you start reviewing your portfolios. Even if you are tied into any fixed rates, get in touch with a mortgage brokerage to understand where the market is heading, what we can do for any cost savings in advance, and make sure that you don't end up on the lender's standard variable rate where your rate can go from 2 or 3% to all high 7 and 8%, which we don't want anybody to go on to.
Okay. And has it all peaked now? Are we on a downward path?
Well, listen, I wish I had that crystal maze, unfortunately, crystal ball.
Well, if you don't know, I don't know.
Yeah. What I would say, I certainly think the Bank of England have got some way to go at the moment. There's talk of another couple of increases in the Bank of England base rate. I certainly believe we'll be at about 5.5% by December of 2023. But there's good economic and economist data out there that's saying inflation is going to drop by half in the next 12 months. Will interest rates follow suit? The problem is we've got too many global issues. But again, we're very optimistic. We're seeing a lot of uptake in mortgages at the moment, but by being purchases and remortgages. So we're quite optimistic.
Okay. And, you know, what's the consequence if you've got a fixed rate mortgage and you don't actively engage with your lender? What happens? It goes on to a sort of standard rate, does it?
Yeah, so if you fall off your fixed rate mortgage, you will end up on the standard variable rate. Most lenders will write to the borrower explaining the actions that will need to be taken ahead of time and the options. But what we do as mortgage brokers, we contact our clients 6 months prior to any deal ending to give them advance warning, giving them the new options, and then take them through the new process.
Okay, well, that's good and helpful. Do you come across this much in your...
No, I don't, but I'm, I know my fixed term's due up, so I'm listening very intently. So it's quite worrying, isn't it? And it's, I guess the issue I see is for buy-to-let landlords where their rates have gone up, and then obviously amongst other reasons, that's been a driver to increase rents. Not the only one, but yeah.
Okay, well, that'll be interesting to look at, won't it, when we look at the new legislation that's coming in, whether you're, I suppose, loss of margin or maybe even loss of total profit becomes an issue for which you could give notice and take your property back.
I doubt it.
Do you doubt it?
I very much doubt that.
Landlords are good people.
Are they? Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of ours are, that's for sure.
Well, that's all good news then, isn't it? Okay, Carly. What's the most common issue that slows down or impedes conveyancing? And I guess that's come as I think we know, I think the average time for a conveyance now is about 150 days, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot longer than it ever used to be. There's so many reasons. I think one of the key ones is poor communication. I think people...
Between who?
Between solicitors sometimes, not my solicitors, but just the lack of picking up a telephone these days and lots of email tennis back and forth, and not sort of asking questions and sort of leaving them to the last minute, that sort of thing. I think there's also a huge concern about lack of qualified professionals available to do the work. There was, when I qualified, back sort of 2000, 2008, it wasn't a sensible thing to go into. It's why I went into litigation. So there was a huge amount of people that didn't go into property at that time, and there's a huge amount that are leaving because property is one of the highest stress areas. It's one of the biggest concerns with your professional indemnity because of the mistakes that can be made, because people have for a long time pushed for high volume and low fees, and that has created, in my view, poor service and a really stressful working environment for residential conveyancers. So it's not been good for a long time. And if you look at the stats recently released by the Law Society, there's been another big exit from the market of professional qualified conveyancers. So it's a real concern. We operate very differently, and I think it really, really works because our solicitors are self-employed, so they don't have to, the way they're remunerated, they don't need to have the big caseload that they would have to justify their salary in a traditional law firm. So they're working on much lower numbers, they're able to deliver a service, and quite often we find that they're waiting for a response and they're the ones chasing and pushing because they've got the time to do so and deliver a proper service.
Okay. I'm always so surprised people try and drive down the cost of conveyancing. I mean, after all, it's probably likely to be your biggest purchase in your life.
Yeah.
Why you would want to cut corners, it's just beyond me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Completely agree.
All right. Any other sort of issues that are outside of your control that slow things down?
The demand, like we talked about with, the questions that need to be asked and the checks that need to be carried out. I mean, they've got more and more complicated. There's a new issue that's, comes along quite regularly. So it's, the list gets a bit longer, those inquiries, and, you can only respond. And, as a solicitor, you've got to protect yourself to make sure that, you're doing the best possible job you can do. You want to get it through as quickly as possible, but also you don't want to take any risks on behalf of your client, and you've got a lender to satisfy as well.
But I also suppose, because there's, as often as not, a third solicitor involved, isn't there? Somebody who's acting for the lender, if it's not one of the two acting for the other side.
It's quite rare. That's quite rare.
But sometimes they've got their own in-house legal.
Yeah. Most of the time, a solicitor will act for the lender and for the purchaser. So that is quite rare. But yeah, again, if you've got somebody else to satisfy, that's it can be really challenging. But that happens more on commercial deals.
Okay. And what's your view of conveyancing times?
Again, how long's a piece of string, unfortunately. I think the key here is when we speak to our clients, we ask the client, do you have a reputable solicitor that you worked with previously, and do you like them, know them, and trust them? If the answer is, well, I'm not sure, no, well, we like to refer to our trusted advisor solicitors, just simply because we can pick up the phone to them. We're very old school. We like that traditional way of working.
It works.
And for us, it's picking up the phone, having that detailed conversation. How can we work smartly? What can we do? Can we provide you with certified documentation and so on? And that just moves the transaction along quicker. But unfortunately, not everyone's got the same views. A lot of lenders now offer free legal conveyancing. So they go after the conveyor belt solicitor firms, which stack them high, and they haven't got that personalised service. No. But again, choose a right reputable firm that you can trust.
I mean, one of the biggest problems we used to have down here, I worked on a couple of blocks in Canary Wharf here, is where you get an out-of-town solicitor who's not used to leasehold properties, just used to straightforward freehold conveyancing. Yeah. They come into this and they're just lost. Yeah. Absolutely lost. And it can just add thousands to the purchaser's bill. And it's quite hard to tell somebody that their solicitor's not really competent, and you know, they just think you're trying to switch them onto a sort of friendly firm of solicitors, but it actually can be quite painful. Yeah. It can be quite painful. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. All right, well, there we are. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show, so join me again after the break when I'll be asking Carly and Akhil more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm joined by Akhil Mair and Carly Jermyn. Welcome back, both of you.
Thank you very much.
And Akhil, your second question. In the current climate, do the experts recommend a full repayment mortgage or perhaps an interest-only arrangement? And I'm thinking of that probably taking into account sort of cost of living crisis, and an interest-only mortgage will bring your payments right down, won't it?
Yeah.
And perhaps see you through the crisis.
No, I agree. So if we break it down in 2 sections, so if you've got your own main residence as a homeowner, traditionally everyone would like a repayment mortgage. And what that means is by the end of a certain term or by a certain age, your house should be debt-free and mortgage-free, and you can live happily ever after. What's happening more and more so now is when the cost of living is increasing, clients are tending to inquire more so about part and part mortgages, so part repayment, part interest only. And some of those with low loan to values, with very little mortgage remaining, is going on an interest only basis just to free up a bit more cash flow and to give them a bit more breathing space. But traditionally, everyone would opt for a repayment, so capital and interest mortgage, for the sanity of repaying their mortgage within a time frame of their age. From a perspective of a buy-to-let mortgage, traditionally everyone would opt for an interest-only mortgage. That's simply because everyone's purchasing buy-to-let as an investment tool, as investment strategy, to create passive income in the background for them to retain that income, that surplus income, and then invest that into more properties going forward. It depends where you are on your journey. I think first and foremost, I think people that are setting off in property would probably want to opt for an interest-only basis, so they can free up a bit more cash, give them more breathing space. If you're a bit more of a seasoned investor, you're sort of halfway or 3/4 of the way into your journey, you might want to start opting for a repayment strategy or half in half. So you're reducing the debt and the capital that you borrowed initially. So you're reducing the loan to values across the book. But again, it's dependent on everyone's goals, where they want to be going forward.
Are both types of mortgage sort of equally available at the moment?
They're certainly available, that's for sure. But again, it is dependent on everyone's scenario. The borrower's appetite, the affordability, if it is their main residence, and the loan to value and the equity that they hold in that property, if it is their main residence. It's totally available in the buy-to-let space. It's very, very common. Everyone does go for an interest-only mortgage. Again, if you own a buy-to-let and it's interest-only, most lenders, if not bar every single lender, will allow you to overpay that mortgage, usually up to 10% of the balance outstanding. And what that benefits you longer term is reducing that debt down and ultimately reducing the interest cost for that period of time.
Yeah, well, I suppose the interest only on buy-to-let, it doesn't really matter that much because it's just a quantifiable cost, isn't it, that you can set against your rental, and you just judge your margin, I suppose. I think I've always had in my mind that perhaps young people getting a start on the ladder, interest only is not that bad, because when you're starting off and you've got 25 years of repayments in front of you, if not 30 years, whatever you're going to be trying to pay off in the first 5 years is going to be negligible anyway, isn't it? So you might as well take the low repayments and enjoy a little bit of freedom until perhaps your career settles down or you're sure of where you're going, which is your point about where you are on the journey, I suppose.
Yes, I agree. If you've got time on your side, take advantage.
Do you go with that, Carly?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, totally makes sense. I mean, when you look at what you're actually repaying, I know you look at it and you think, I've been doing repayment mortgage, you look at what you've actually repaid, it's a tiny bit depressing, isn't it?
Yes,
So, and I can see, when you're talking about going onto standard variable and sort of riding, out this period, I think the thought of having, perhaps putting it on interest only sounds quite attractive, really.
Yeah.
And looking at all the options.
I mean, it's the same at the moment. I mean, there's a lot, whatever you buy, there's quite a few interest-only deals around on consumer goods and that sort of thing. And I think in these times, I think that's extremely useful because you're balmy not to, aren't you? If you can keep more of your income, you give yourself more flexibility. And I think that's what an interest-only mortgage can do for you. But I was just interested to know whether they are readily available, or whether lenders are a little bit nervous in this climate.
No, they're certainly available. Again, it's dependent on the individual circumstances.
Carly, where new legislation might, for instance, require landlords to allow tenants to have pets, what takes precedence if the existing head lease of a building says no?
There's been huge amounts of discussion about this, and people for a long time have been pushing to allow tenants to have pets, and one of the biggest concerns, like you say, has been the clash between what you're allowed to do under your lease and what you're going to be pushed or encouraged to do for your tenant in the property. And the bill that we have now seen does have that in there as a ground that you can reasonably refuse if you are either prohibited or you've requested consent from your landlord and that's been refused. So, your lease will take precedent.
Okay. Just again, an interesting point is people who've watched this programme heard me say this a lot of times. You have a rental situation. Your tenant looks at the lease, agrees it, likes it, signs it. Your landlord's made it, he's drafted it, he's signed it. And my view is always, well, why don't you just always do what the lease says? Just do it. Just both of you. Stop all the nonsense and just do it. Now, isn't there a difference here between, say, somebody that's signed up and is in a property that says no pets, just in their own personal short hold tenancy, it says no pets. Suddenly they want to have pets. I think there's a difference there between, say, perhaps taking a new tenancy agreement out where you're not an existing tenant and you've got an existing pet that you want to move in with you. Is there not a difference there? Is there not a subtle?
I guess I think, look, they're clearly moving to wanting people to have their own pets for many, many reasons. So there'll be a transition period. So I think if you're in a property and, the new legislation comes in, you should be able to benefit from that new legislation. But if you're in there and you're already in breach and you've got a pet, but the new legislation comes in, I'd struggle to be confident if I was taking a landlord to say, look, we'll go to court and we'll get them on this breach. Even now, with that new legislation bubbling as it is, I wouldn't want to be going to court for a landlord to say your tenant's in breach. People don't tend to with pets anyway. And actually, if I'm completely honest, I don't see the concern around it. I understand the concern if they're in blocks and they're causing a nuisance and annoyance. But then if they are causing a nuisance and annoyance, then you can deal with it on that ground. But actually, most of the time, the concern has been around damage to the property. We deal with a lot of claims for landlords that relate to damage to the property. And, it's very rarely caused by the pets. It's the tenants in there. And it's quite rare that actually that's the problem.
Tenants.
Yeah, it's rare. So, but, obviously if they are causing a nuisance and annoyance, it's very different, one small dog in a house compared to several dogs in a flat. And, they are more likely to cause a nuisance and annoyance. And that's the sort of ground you'd be looking at.
Yeah, but I mean, the new bill seems to be a little bit ambiguous in my view, because it simply says that as a landlord, you'd be obliged to consider the request. Well, I've considered it, and the answer is no.
No, what they're suggesting is that you will not be able to, unless it's prohibited by your lease and that takes precedent, then you're going to struggle.
Well, what if I've spent a lot of money on the furniture and the furnishings and the dedecoration and I don't want an animal in there?
Take a nice big deposit and make sure that you can recoup it.
But then I'm restricted to 5 weeks deposit, aren't I?
So the other, what they, we've seen in the bill as well, and this is what we were expecting to see, is the encouragement for insurance. So pet insurance, and that landlords will be able to retain control of that insurance, and that they've amended the Tenant Fees Act, which prohibited that, well, didn't allow that as a payment. You couldn't force somebody to take out insurance, but they're going to change that. That's what we're expecting. Obviously, it's still got a journey to go through Parliament.
Would it be the landlord taking that out or the tenant?
It will be in the tenant's name. I think the landlord will take control of it and deduct the cost from the tenant.
Right.
Because otherwise, a tenant would simply take out insurance on the start of the tenancy and then cancel it, so they don't have to pay it.
Seems to me with these extra clauses. I mean, so yeah, I'm just thinking of a letting agent sitting there and trying to explain to a tenant that, well, he's going to have to go back to the landlord and see what the cost of the pet insurance is, and then the tenant starts saying, well, I don't like that, I think that's too much, I've seen one on TV for this much a month.
Yeah, I mean, the benefit that landlords have is that demand for rental properties is incredibly high. So, you know, if a tenant doesn't like the insurance policy or the landlord's view on that sort of thing, then there's, 20 other tenants that probably are going to be a bit more amenable. So in that respect, they have a little bit of power, I guess.
Right.
Still.
Now, just a final point, Carly, as a solicitor, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this question. So you're sitting in a letting agent's office, you found the property you want, and you think that you've been denied entry to that property or access to that property through perhaps because you've got a pet or because you've got a collection of children or whatever else. Where do you go with that complaint?
It depends. I mean, the ones that you see that are quite common are more on the grounds of discrimination. So well,
it's all discrimination in one form or another.
But talking discrimination on the grounds of disability, race, that sort of thing, the obvious ones. And actually, what we always say to agents is that you need to make sure you've got clear processes and communication, that you've shown that you've gone through a fair selection process. And so if I was a tenant and I thought I hadn't been through a fair selection process, I'd want to see, subject to GDPR rather, what that selection process was, and for them to be very clear as to why I was denied the property. But like I say, with the demand so high, it's going to be very easy.
But where do you go with that complaint?
If take them to court, you'd sue them for discrimination if you really thought that was a concern. And we've seen them. But
it's not practical, is it? It's not practical for an applicant to take a landlord to court. It's going to take a couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just balmy.
Just jump on Rightmove and go again. Find another property to go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But we do see it happen, and we've had to act for agents and landlords so that we can support them to demonstrate they haven't been discriminatory. And most of the time they haven't been. But the question is whether they're able to prove they haven't been. And that their systems and processes are fair.
Where is the onus of proof on the tenant to prove that they've been discriminatory, or the landlord to prove they're not?
Well, technically it's on them they're bringing the claim, the tenant's bringing the claim. But, if I'm acting for a landlord, I'd want to be able to show that they've got those processes.
Okay.
To dismiss the claim quickly.
Very complicated note. We're going to end the show. So I'm going to say Carly Jermyn, CEO and solicitor at Woodstock Legal Services. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Akhil Mair, hope you've enjoyed the show. Thank you for coming in. Super answers. Akhil is Managing Director of Our Mortgage Broker Limited.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you all very much indeed. Join me again next time on Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin. See you then.